So, I think a lot of people do reach out to us asking about, how do you start a collective? What does this look like? And it's important to know that we are simply a 4-member LLC. It is pretty simple. We haven't gone kind of the co-op route yet. We haven't really developed any business model that's very complicated, but I do think that the kind of thing that is innovative is just the fact that it is multiple farmers that aren't, married. Not all of us are married, and we do have kind of these different parts of the farm that we're focusing on, but we have this true buy-in as owners to really invest in the farm and commit to the long-term story of the farm.
Hello, everyone. Today, I am talking with Hannah Rose Weber and Nate Lada, two of the owners at Green Things Farm Collective in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Green Things is a contemporary majority woman-owned farm business that has evolved out of several businesses. Nate and his wife, Jill, first started Green Things Farm in 2011 at a local farm incubator program. Then they purchased 64 acres where the farm is now settled. In 2020, Green Things joined with Ann Arbor Seed Company and the Land Loom to expand production, share management of running a diverse farm business, and develop a model of sustainable, cooperative, and responsible farming. They offer seasonal vegetables and flowers to their local markets through various channels, as well as beef. My guest Hannah takes the lead on marketing, sales, and personnel development. Nate leads vegetable production infrastructure and production systems innovation. And they are joined by a crew of dedicated farmers, including Jill Lada and Michelle Brosius, who are also co-owners. Often on this podcast, I like to discuss people's personal farming journeys as much as the business side of the discussion. But in this case, for my research, it feels like the Green Things Farm Collective almost has a soul and spirit of its own that far transcends what the individual owners and farmers bring to it. So I'm excited to hear more about the farm itself, how it has evolved, how the people involved are working to meet their goals of sustainability, and more. Hannah and Nate, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, as always. It sounds like Green Things Farm Collective has evolved quite a lot over the years and now provides work and purpose for many farmers. Can you two tell us more about the farm, how the farm got to where it is today, and what that journey was like?
Yeah, so in 2011, Jill and I were passionate young folks fresh out of college thinking about starting a farm, and we were privileged to be admitted into a new farm incubator program that was starting up in Ann Arbor on some township land, and it basically provided a 2-year tenure at just some township land with access to a barn and some basic infrastructure and tools. And we started Green Things Farm there with just the two of us. And because the program was such a short tenured opportunity, the goal was really to find a permanent home relatively quickly and to sort of transition the business off of that land to make space for new farmers. And so in 2012, so we started with small CSA style. Neither of us came from farming backgrounds. So we were really just making up as we went along. And we were lucky to be farming alongside some more seasoned farmers, Alex and Mark from Seeley Farm, who are now our neighbors still all these years later. And they had been touring the country working on various farms, and we're sort of more serious farmers doing a lot of greens production. And Ben Fiddler, who was a livestock farmer And so, and he was raising pastured pork and chicken and goat. And so a unique part of that opportunity was to be able to sort of farm while we theoretically knew what we were doing, which we didn't really. We spent a lot of time sort of keeping a close eye on what the three of them were doing and their operations, and sort of mimicking things and learning as we went. And in 2012, we purchased 64 acres of vacant land just outside of the Ann Arbor city limit. And the land is in a conservation easement, which helped us afford it. And the fact that it had never been developed was poorly suited for development due to poor drainage and lack of access to utilities, led it to be fairly affordable. And so we purchased that in 2012 and promptly got married, built our first hoop house here, a 30 by 192 foot nifty hoop house, and built a cooler and started farming. So that was sort of the origin of this place. And I guess over the years, we sort of developed as a market farm, selling at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market. We had a CSA since the beginning. And as we sort of expanded our production, we certified organic in 2015 when the land was eligible for certification. We sort of dabbled in scale from just sort of a small, humble beginning to I think we were trying to farm around 10 acres in 2015, which was way, even in some ways bigger than we are now, land-wise use. And sort of slowly grew our business through trial and error, and mostly error. And I guess we, as part of a farming community, we're really excited that this area, because of the incubator program where Hannah was farming shortly after us, and just sort of the robustness of the Ann Arbor market, there's a lot of small farms. And we basically watched, quite a few people starting farm businesses that looked a lot like ours over the years. And we all were sort of feeling like we were in the same ship, trying to do the same things. And that sort of spurred on this idea that became the collective. But maybe Hannah can talk a little bit about the origin of her business and then how we sort of combine them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like Nate said, I also started my farm, which was the Land Loom, through Tillian Farm Development Center. Kind of in the next iteration of that program, after Nate and Jill and Mark and Alex had left that property, it kind of transferred to a new nonprofit housing organization. And I came on in 2015 there as a solo farmer. I kind of started my business primarily doing greens through these membership programs that I called the Salad Club and the Winter Spinach Club. Started there while I was managing another farm in the area called Sunseed Farm, and slowly developed kind of a small market farm. Started marketing through similar outlets as Green Things Farm, through the Carytown Farmers Market, Argus Farm Stop, which was just recently on your podcast, and a number of other kind of restaurants and stuff. So I was kind of dabbling in all sorts of things, still continuing to do it primarily on my own with a little part-time help here and there, looking for land. At the time, I was... They weren't quite so strict about that 2-year tenure at Tillian. And so I ended up being there for 5 years, renting land, renting the equipment and hoop houses there, which was a real privilege. And, because it's quite challenging to find land here in the Ann Arbor area, as it is so many places. And I did get to a kind of a point where, I'd had a few land opportunities fall to the wayside, and I was really kind of just continuing to hustle, both farming in the daytime, working at restaurants at night, and not really knowing kind of how to continue as the Land Loom. So kind of in my mind, part of how our collaboration started was I did kind of reach out to Nate and Jill and Eric Campy, and I was kind of like I was just kind of letting them know that I might be kind of like leaving the scene, like not kind of sure what I'm gonna do next. And I think that kind of just led us to having these conversations around, how could we support each other? How can we like not let this happen? And one thing led to another, and we realized, we really are doing a lot of similar things, and how could we leverage the kind of market shares that we already have, the customer bases that we've already developed, and the brands that we have, and come together and do this more effectively. And I think that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. I love that idea that there are often people doing very similar things in a community, and I love the idea of recognizing that maybe those can actually be shared projects. Even in many ways, we often are in cooperation just to make things like farmers markets work, and help building the idea of local food is all a cooperative project, but to actually cooperate is a whole nother step. So let's talk about that. What does being a collective mean to Green Things and its owners? I imagine this has also evolved, that you started with some key values and goals, but that in the reality that's had to sort of be processed. What does that look like?
So, I think a lot of people do reach out to us asking about, how do you start a collective? What does this look like? And it is important to know that we are simply a 4-member LLC. It is pretty simple. We haven't gone kind of the co-op route yet. We haven't really developed any business model that's very complicated, but I do think that the kind of thing that is innovative is just the fact that it is multiple farmers that aren't, married. Not all of us are married, and we do have kind of these different parts of the farm that we're focusing on, but we have this true buy-in as owners to really invest in the farm and commit to the long-term story of the farm. What do you want to add?
Yeah, so I think when we came together, we had these 3 businesses, Green Things Farm. We had sort of the land access and a lot of infrastructure and equipment that we had sort of developed here. We had Ann Arbor Seed Company, which was Eric's business, and that was sort of a seed-oriented retail local seed business. And then Hannah's sort of salad greens operation. And I think what we realized, was that farming is complex, and farming takes a huge, diverse skill set. And it felt like we were all sort of competing for the same little piece of the pie, and also being redundant in sort of the I think there's a lot of farming that feels like it can bog you down, like financial things and equipment maintenance, and we sort of were having to all do everything. And it can be a real drag. And finding people that we had been really close with and really transparent with over the years about sort of the struggles of farming, and had sort of leaned on each other in the past for support, we started saying, what would it look like if we basically combined our efforts and worked on a project together with the expertise that we all sort of brought to the table. And so, basically that looks like Hannah mentioned, like a simple LLC. We just formed a new business relationship. We sort of kept the Green Things brand being sort of the most place-based business at the time. We also kept the Seed Company branding for a couple years, and we sort of dropped the Land Loom marketing eventually and sold under this sort of Green Things Farm Collective business. We're farming all on sort of the Green Things original property that Jill and I still own separately as a business, and we also have a house that we built here. And so Jill and I live on the property. Yeah, and then sort of the other change that happened over time was, so there were originally 5 of us co-owners and all sort of equal partners. And in early 2022, Eric decided that to leave the collective. And so we sort of have provisioned ways for people to join and to leave the business. And Eric basically wanted to leave. So we sort of kept on the seed company in his absence. And we had a longtime employee who was sort of managing that for a couple of years. And even though that part of the business, everything is all sort of under this umbrella of Green Things Farm Collective, the seed business was sort of not the outlier necessarily, but did have sort of this former branding that we had maintained. And for a variety of reasons, we decided to sort of close that chapter of the farm this past fall, and mostly for financial reasons and for some just sort of facing the realities of growing seed in the sort of Midwest region, and some of the challenges that we were having with the actual production side of things, trying to grow like an in-house, we were growing all of our own varieties, not buying anything in, and it was increasingly harder and harder to maintain sort of a robust catalog with the climate challenges here. So all that transpired to basically close that side of the business. But I guess at this point we have sort of such a diverse business that it really didn't feel like we were losing out on sort of what makes this a unique place. And we have so many things going on, and Hannah can really speak to this, but from memberships to a huge cut flower growing operation. We've got beef cattle. We do lots of collaborations with other farms and other food aggregators. And I think, having sort of this ownership model that's greater than 1 or 2 people has really let us expand to our interests and sort of play off of each other's strengths. And that's where we're sort of at today.
Yes, your farm has a lot going on. I can attest to that from hanging out on your website and social media for a while. There's plenty of moving parts, it looks like. Okay, so I can definitely see the advantages of pooling resources, pooling knowledge. Also, just having more than 1 or 2 very dedicated long-term minds invested in a project just seems amazing. I know that on our farm, it was always so sad when a long-term employee would leave, because that was a person who also carried all this knowledge about our farm. So you have just more of that, more little libraries of people. But have there been challenges too in making this work? Bringing the businesses together. I know I'm just thinking that it could get tricky to transition from being friends who are also farmers to like talking about money in a more really specific way. As much as you're willing to share, I'm curious how some of those things have gone, and if there have been really clear boundaries you've put in place, systems you've put in place, like to make sure that everybody feels like they're getting a fair deal at the end of every year.
Yeah, I mean, I think what comes up for me first is I'm really grateful that we did have a market in place, and So I think one of the first things that we realized was that decision making, as a group and making decisions together for the first time is like a whole new kind of layer of this business that we didn't really have to deal with before. I mean, Nate and Jill as partners dealt with decision making together, but then you add 2-3 more people that also have an equal say in all of these things. Really had to over time develop how we talk about things, how we make decisions, what decisions can we have one owner who's kind of in charge of a department make a decision. But truly, I think that we would have had a lot more barriers if we had to make the decisions about where we were selling, how we were making that money. We already knew that, like, okay, we've got this really strong base of, these farmers markets, these outlets that we've all been selling out of, and we know that they work and we can start there. But yeah, we really just the complexity of deciding how to decide, I think, was like this kind of thing that we, are still developing. We all have kind of developed our roles in the farm, and there's great overlap, which is really helpful. I kind of oversee sales and marketing and personnel, but I do that in quite a collaboration with Jill. She also handles finances, but we kind of all have these areas that we're kind of making sure we're kind of cross-checking with each other and not just kind of siloing kind of the kind of decision making of one thing or one area. But I think that was probably the, one of the biggest challenges. You think about small scale farmers being these like very, independent,
yes.
Independent minded people. Right. And, they want to make their own rules. They want to like experiment. They want to like try everything out. And, there's still a lot of that. And that's like the great thing about kind of like being able to be part of this bigger organization is like no one area is absolutely like set in stone. And, there is room for play and just a lot of still development. But, yeah, we're just kind of ever evolving and kind of ever, really building this organization from the ground up. And I know that I feel like I've learned so much about just organizational development as a part of the collective that, as a solo farmer, I didn't have to. It seemed like I could make really quick decisions, but were they good decisions?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much growing that we've all done together and separately. I think that we've done quite a bit of business training and professional development. That's something that none of us had ever done independently, as farmers before. We was sort of learning to communicate. We read books. We talked about communication styles. Lots of therapy, lots of kind of discussions, interpersonal discussions, and it's been messy at times. I think that the success of our farm as pieces start fitting together, and we can talk about this later, but a big piece of the farming is just the production side of things. And as we sort of started, we had transitioned to no-till or began transitioning to no-till and sort of picked up that as a production method that really felt like it had potential here. And as that sort of developed on the farm, it's sort of been one piece of the puzzle that's enabled a lot of what's happened, on the whole. And so I think a lot of people, we all sort of were struggling just on the production end and also on the sales end and also on, the equipment end. And when we came together, we were able to, sort of work on these, compartmentalize these different parts of the business, put resources to where sort of the lowest hanging fruit was. And what's been really neat is as we've sort of found different successes over the past 4 years, it's really helped us have more resources to put towards the things that aren't going well and are continuing to block us up. So it has felt a lot to me like the last 14 years of farming is a really big progression, and the challenges that you face in the beginning sort of set you up for the next challenges, and as you develop the resources on your farm, hopefully those help you continue moving towards your next challenge. And so we were sort of well equipped as sort of veteran business owners when we came together to sort of move past some of those more like logistics challenges. We all sort of knew how to farm. We had all sort of cut our teeth and not had to argue over how to drive a tractor and sort of things, how to harvest. And I think in the day to day, it's surprising. A lot of people ask, like how decision making goes. And the reality is that there's very few things that we find, or I find that we're not aligned on. When we start to talk about big picture things, it surprises me how on the same page we all are, despite having sort of 4 different people in the room. We tend not to have big disagreements. And what I found is that when there are disagreements, they tend to be fairly petty, or not necessarily petty, but there are things where there's more than one right way to do it. And often what we found is that, or I found is that, paying attention to just sort of who the person is that will actually be doing the thing, and giving them the space to do something the way they want to do it, instead of inserting your own preference, has been a big thing. And I've had to like remove myself from, lots of parts of the farm, because I just have this tendency to want to micromanage and think that I know the best way to do things. And it's often, better just to stand back and let other people sort of lead and figure things out for themselves. And that's been a real strength, I think, is sort of recognizing that. And then when it comes to the big things, you'll be surprised how much everyone sort of is like-minded, because we all sort of are in this farming community, more aligned than different. And that's made working together actually really easy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to say, like, I want to echo that, just kind of how freeing it is to know that you have, these other people with minds on different areas of the farm. I'm Nate's kind of been trying to head up this new cooler project, and something that we all know is really important. But the fact that, I'm not the one having to like get into the project management of truly any of the infrastructure. That is not my area of expertise. And I really appreciate that, Nate's got that in his mind, and he understands kind of like how that should go. I find it to be just truly, again, compared to being a solo entrepreneur, I think that I still kind of, at the end of my time at the Land Loom, I was just really focused on selling everything I could. And I did kind of like let some of this infrastructure go to the wayside, because I just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So now it's like, right, I'm part of this larger group, and I don't have to be kind of worrying about these other areas, and you can kind of really focus on those specific things that each of us do well, and trust that, these other things are being taken care of. It's great.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a really great partnership going between the 4 of you, which is a wonderful thing to have. So I'm curious about what kinds of business resources, or if there's anything specific that you found especially helpful as you realized you needed to kind of up your personal development to make it work as a team.
Well, we reached out to, a number of colleagues that we've had. We work really closely with this farm, the farm at Trinity Health, which is a hospital in the area. They have a aggregated farm share program that we contribute a lot to. And they kind of have the resources on their own as the part of this larger organization to be kind of making a lot of these similar kind of professional development decisions. And we had their supervisor come in and, talk to our crew about, giving and receiving feedback. And we also kind of worked with a business coach for a while that had been recommended to us by one of the other people working there. And we've also, we listen to a lot of podcasts, and we go to conferences, and we get kind of a full range of thinking about what are other people doing in terms of developing employee policy on the farm. And there's just so many resources out there that mean that you don't have to be kind of reinventing the wheel. But we really do pull from kind of all over the place. I don't know if you have any other specifics in mind.
Yeah, I was just thinking something that's really professionalized sort of the way that we work on the farm in sort of the day-to-day was last year around this time, we had come off of a pretty good year in 2022, and we had some money banked up from a good season, and we decided to, on top of the 4 owners, really, we realized we needed, at the scale we were at, we realized we needed a larger management team, and to really kind of professionalize and train up folks who could sort of manage other employees and sort of develop the systems that we were going to use on the day-to-day. And so we basically spent our winter employing like 7 people as a management team and paying them to help develop with us handbooks and policies and systems and all the sort of like routine day-to-day things that farms do, but sort of depend on that institutional knowledge, depend on those returning employees. And we sort of realized, well, the 4 of us may be here in the long haul, but there's still so much knowledge that's captured in other folks that work here. And without documenting that and sort of and turning it into the way that we do things here, it's really hard to change that, or to have that continuity from year to year with different people coming and going. So last winter, we really leaned into that and invested in it, and just spent a lot of time indoors in the off season, sort of figuring out, how we want our spreadsheets to work, how we want our communications, across the farm to work, trying things, having meetings, discussing, and that investment in time really feels to me like it paid off in terms of having a better organizational structure and having something that this year, at the same time, I feel really well equipped to move into this season. We have really clear expectations for when people are coming back and what their roles are. And it's just alleviated a lot of sort of that little like hiccuping that you do in the winter, where you're just trying to, in fits and starts, plan out your season ahead. And we got our crop planning done in the fall, which was awesome. And all of that sort of like has worked together to feel like we have a really, a more organized farm, which you kind of need at, once it's just beyond a couple people, you have to be really organized. So that investment in people, I think, has been a really powerful part of the farm.
Yeah, really big. I mean, I also just want to reiterate that, like you said, we put all of this time in developing kind of our personnel and these systems that allow, anybody who's trained and has the aptitude to kind of like come in and know what their role is on the farm. And as such, we are looking at almost having, 100% return of our, which is, I think, just a huge, return on that investment. And, you never know what's going to happen, in these months that people are away. Everybody says they want to return. And that's really exciting to us. It means that we've done our job in, kind of creating a workplace that people are excited to keep coming back to and know that they're making a big impact in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of those really positive metrics for a farm, right? There's CSA retention and employee retention. And obviously, employees have lives. Moving on is not always about the farm not being a good place. Sometimes it's just where the farm fits into their trajectory. But as farmers, we love it when good people stick around. So that's awesome. I want to talk a little more about your land. I think the 64 acres right outside of Ann Arbor is an amazing idea to me. Any kind of land of that scale so close to a substantially sized city feels like a gem. So it was in the conservation program. What is the land like? You mentioned poorly drained, and I was like, oh, that's not always what a farmer wants to hear, but clearly you've made it work. What is the land like? And also for people who aren't from the area, how does your climate also affect your farm? Because we have people from all over who listen to this podcast. I love talking about climate differences because, we're all doing the same work, but we do it in really different places, even just in the US, right? We have such different growing conditions.
Yeah, so we're, heart of the Midwest in southeastern Michigan. The climate is, I don't even know what zone we're in, 5A or B or something.
Changed recently maybe, but
something like that. It gets cold in the winter. It gets hot in the summer. I think the thing that feels like is different to me is we are getting winters have been sort of these wild temperature swing winters the past few years. We get, extreme cold. We're sort of getting that polar vortex thing that is now the norm, which is it's very, very cold. And then we warm up to above freezing. I think it's like 40 degrees today.
In February.
Yeah.
For our listening audience.
Yeah, huge swings in temperatures. It makes, especially for the cattle, really challenging.
Oh, yeah.
The ground doesn't freeze right. We haven't had a solid, ground freeze in maybe 2 or 3 years now, or a prolonged freeze, which is sort of pretty challenging. But we do get snow, and then summers we have high humidity, classic summer weather. Lots of wind. We're sort of on this big, so surrounding Ann Arbor is sort of this bubble of surrounded by highways, and in the 90s, I think, or maybe even before that, there was sort of this group of people that envisioned a green belt around the city to prevent sort of urban sprawl, which affects so many bigger cities, and so. Basically, they passed a millage to try and buy up development rights on farmland, specifically surrounding Ann Arbor, and they call that the Ann Arbor Greenbelt. And so there's been some dedicated, movement towards protecting farmland, specifically surrounding the city, for quite a few years now, and in the early days, what that looked like was really, just trying to find the most land and protect it all in as few agreements as possible, which looked like these really big tracts of conventionally farmed, row crop land, and those were sort of the star, target properties. And those worked really well for the big conventional farmers in the area because they were able to, capitalize on land they were already farming, already owned, weren't planning on developing, but they were sort of conserved in this way that makes it really best suited for that kind of agriculture, large scale. few building envelopes where you could actually develop housing or infrastructure to run like a smaller farm business. By the time sort of our land came up for sale, it was owned by developers. And yeah, to your point, it was undeveloped because it perked really poorly. And also the township had changed some zoning regulations to where you could only build a house on 10 acres, one house per 10 acres, to sort of minimize density, which is a whole nother discussion. But so it basically had not been panned out for these developers because they were able to get sort of a combination of money from us buying the conserved land and the township and the city that sort of bought the development rights on the land. We paid $3,000 an acre for 59 acres and then kept 5 acres in a building envelope to sort of, because we knew that we wanted to have a farm business that needed infrastructure. So we kept 5 acres sort of in this area that we can develop. And then I guess, so our land is heavy clay. We're poorly drained with no outlets. And for many years, basically in the early days when we were sort of a tillage-based farm and we're just sort of learning, I had an affinity towards tractors and equipment and we were ripping everything up and it was muddy and it was wet and we lost a lot of crops every year to lack of access to our fields and flooding and, just not being able to get in to cultivate and swamped plants. And we also have our land is fairly undulating. It's fairly flat, but it undulates. And so there were a lot of areas that trapped water. And when we initially sort of laid out the farm, we had thought, well, let's just make a straight lane down the field and fields off of that. And, longer is better. And so we had, at some point we had standardized 200-foot beds. And what the farm looks like today is a really cherry-picked fields across those. It's about 20 acres is wooded. So out of the 40 available acres and about 5 is in a building envelope. So out of 35 acres, we maybe have about 5.5 or 6 acres that we've sort of identified as properly drained. And what that basically means is just that it's on a slope and doesn't hold water. It's not actually drained. And so we've really sort of cut down the sort of that thinking of, when you come to a big cornfield and you go, wow, you can really grow corn on 40 acres here. When you're trying to grow a radish, that is going to be in and out of the ground in 3 weeks, you need to have that land available the duration of the growing season and not just that 1 week in June when you can plant and that 3 weeks in fall when you can harvest. And so, so basically we had sort of moved to a raised bed system. We tried, some bed shaping to sort of get above our drainage problems. And then that created lots of issues with, where the water was going and how do you drive and how do you do weed management. And eventually we sort of dabbled in, Eric had been playing around with some tarping and some mulch pathways on his farm and convinced us to give that a try. And also as a result of being really close to an urban center, we have a huge access to wood chips. It's like a common, pretty easy to source around here. And because of sort of the greater metropolitan Detroit area, there's a huge amount of municipal leaf collection and compost collection. And we've sort of over the years tuned into a couple people that are making compost, high organic compost, leaf-based, vegetative-based compost on huge scales, and it's relatively affordable because it's so readily available. And so we've been investing in sort of compost and wood chips as the base of our deep mulch sort of no-till practices. And as we sort of moved above our soil horizons that were so depleted and also just damaged from years of conventional farming, uh, we started seeing all the advantages to being able to get in our fields any day of the year, to have smaller growing blocks. We're at 100-foot beds now, permanent pathways. We spend no time on tillage.
That sounds nice.
Which is great. And at this point, because of sort of the way we've been farming, I don't want to say we don't have weeds, but we probably can effectively weed our entire farm in under a day, on any given sort of like part of the season with a small crew. And so we're farming largely without weeds. And as I'm sure people like the Nordells can attest to, when you're not spending all that time weeding, you have a lot of time to grow food.
Yeah.
So
wow, you're breaking my heart over here. Weeds are like the biggest issue on our farm. We need to work on this.
Yeah.
So
I think our more perennials. They are, thistle and, wild lettuce and these, kind of deeply taprooted weeds that, we can kind of put a weeding crew on, these hot spots. And, I think last year we did really an amazing job at getting, to that thistle before it's, blowing all over the farm. And, there's definitely points in the season where, things get a little bit rougher, but I would say that the fact that we can put our labor into these, kind of other labor intensive tasks on the farm that are definitely more kind of income driven rather than the who knows how long it's going to take to like weed chickweed out of a parsnip patch. It's like, it's just a much better way of using our labor for sure.
right. Well, and the no-till system with the deep bedding, that is pretty labor intensive, but like you said, it's predictable. Yeah. Right. You know how long it'll take to lay mulch, and it can be mechanized in a way. But yes, weeding is an unknown variable at times. So I wanted to clarify, because this is where the different parts of the country are so interesting to me. Flooding and oversaturation for you is an issue in the summer because you have rain.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. It can be an issue at any time.
Uh-huh.
Tends to be the worst in the spring.
Okay.
When we're coming out of that freeze
Right.
thaw as many places, but we can get summer rains. We can get an inch of rain on any given day of the summer through a thunderstorm and or more. And yeah, and that, I mean, there's drainage is such a complex, and water is obviously so complex, and plants need it, but they don't need too much, and they need it at the right times. And I think, the good thing about being in a rainy area is we have, good aquifers. We're we irrigate with well water that's fairly reliable and clean and not super nasty. And so we're able to do overhead irrigation on just about the whole 5.5 acres. We love that because the soil all wants to be happily watered.
Are you using hand lines for that, or what kind of overhead are you?
We basically have these 4-foot risers. So because our beds are 100 feet long, it's our irrigation is universal across the farm. We have more or less like headers going to each field that have pressurized water. It's all above ground, but out of one central hydrant location, we ran, pressurizable black polyethylene 2-inch pipe across the field. And then at every field is an irrigation timer, a cheap timer. But when you're irrigating 5 acres, you have to really, off of a single well, you have to have things pretty well scheduled. So that was sort of a cool update. So every field is able to be on its own sort of timer mechanism instead of having 100 hydrants in the field, which is the way a lot of people, it's the dream if you have all that infrastructure, which we didn't want to pay for. So it's all above ground. And then each field has its own header that has these laterals that go down the pathways of the beds or in the beds, kind of depending. And those are just sort of that blue oval hose, blue stripe oval hose. And so those are all 90-foot long because they don't have to go quite to the end of the fields. I'll come off those headers, and then across that every 20 feet, there's a ladder or a riser. That's 4-foot riser. They're on just sort of a metal stake or a snow stake. And then we use these Nelson spinner heads, kind of like the mini wobblers. They're sweet. We use an S10 spinner that I recommend. They're kind of hard to find, but they work pretty well. We've got a bunch of them now, so we're sticking with that. Mini wobblers are great. And basically that will water a 4-bed block. And so for every 4 beds, we have a lateral in the middle with 5 risers down it. And that's considered like one unit of irrigation. And so we have that. And then all of our fields are, for the most part, are in multiples of 4 beds. So some of our fields have 12 beds, some have 32, some have 24, some have 36. So we're not super particular about the size of our fields, but they have to be in that multiple of 4, which works for our irrigation. And then those can just get broken down really easily. We just pop the risers out like tarping. And if we want to do field work, we can kind of disassemble that all really easily with hand tools and pull it out of the way. And it's been pretty nimble and pretty cost effective too. It's not a huge investment, and it's easy to adapt and build new fields, and it's all kind of works off the same principle. So
yes. So after you plant, you just set up the irrigation, and then it's more or less there. You're not moving it around.
Yep.
That sounds nice.
Yeah. Each lateral is on a quarter turn, so we can turn off, kind of blocks within a field if we need to, which is really handy. But other than that, it just out.
And is there, with the way you have your farm structured, is there a person who's like the irrigation person who takes charge of setting stuff up and fiddling with things if they're leaking or?
Yeah, more or less. We've sort of settled this past year on a 3-manager production team that's sort of managing the field spaces, and one of them usually sort of takes on the irrigation responsibilities. And it's something that anyone can kind of troubleshoot if something pops out and there's a big geyser of water.
That happens in the summer.
That happens. So we've got lots of people that can kind of troubleshoot that. But with the timing system, it's been really handy to have sort of one person dedicated to that. But again, with moving towards this, we're into sort of systems and mechanizing here. Because we're trying to grow, I guess, it's not the mission of our farm to just grow a ton of food, but we are trying to be a production based, high density production farm. And so we are trying to grow as much food and basically have our labor scaled to the harvest. And so, we've got almost 3 people responsible for the production of about 5.5 acres of vegetables. And they're also, they're loosely involved with harvest occasionally if needed, but pretty much 3 people with some additional part-time help are doing all the growing of the food. And then we have a team of, 15 on sort of the harvest and, post-harvest side. So when you're sort of efficient with how your systems are for growing things, you can see our labor is really stacked on the post production side. feels really good because that's where you make your money.
Yes. Yeah, you don't make your money weeding.
Right,
I mean, you have to
right.
weed sometimes, but that's not.
Yep.
Oh, so I'm curious, in an extension of your farm itself, that proximity to Ann Arbor, how has that affected your farm and your marketing and also your employee base? I mean, being right next to a
Yeah.
college town sounds really dreamy, but I don't know if that's really is it that dreamy for recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, we do tend to have, last year I think we had 3 or 4 people that were kind of coming, almost right out of college, had studied some type of either ag or kind of sustainable, environmental, work. But I think that we really do this last year. We were really trying to prioritize hiring people that did have farming experience. We do, because we are not just a kind of a field season farm. We're looking for people that can come in a little bit earlier and stay a little bit later. So, having people that are currently students aren't, we haven't had that be kind of our main type of employee, but we definitely have a really strong kind of pool of candidates, I would say, like, from U of M, from Michigan State, that, have had some background in horticulture and, are excited about, getting their hands in the dirt and farming. But I would say, the proximity to Ann Arbor has been, amazing for so many reasons, and probably spoiled us a bit. We currently, really only do most of our deleveries, right into town. We're 4 miles away from our farmers market.
Wow.
Maybe, I think our radius really for delivery is like maybe 10 miles on average at the most. And so, that's something that we're aware of. And I'm always just amazed and wonder, how the economics work for, farms that most of them are, quite far away from their markets and, doing just so much driving. So we're really thankful for that. We're also really thankful that we're, within this location that is, very close to a lot of neighborhoods and communities. And we do have an on-farm farm stand that is open 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Last year, I think it was April through mid-December. We're going to try to start opening in March this year. And that's a self-serve farm stand, and people are just coming in. They're buying straight off the farm. We also do a lot of farm events. We know that there's a big value in bringing people onto the farm and, having them see what we're doing. Our farm is really beautiful, and it's we have a lot of road frontage, and so we're aware that we're a very visible farm, and there's a lot of value to that, just in people being able to drive past our farm and know that we're there, and yeah, we're very very much in our community that we feed.
Mm-hmm.
The one sort of drawback that in my mind, the major drawback is that housing is a huge issue here, and the cost of living in Ann Arbor is pretty high, and in the surrounding areas is pretty high. And as a result of sort of this Greenbelt initiative, a lot of the land that historically would have been developed into more diversified housing surrounding a city like this has really been maintained as agricultural land. And we've really, as our crew has grown, we've really acknowledged that the cost of living is a huge barrier to working here and continuing to work here. And as we've sort of become more like career minded with how we think about long-term employees, it really has become sort of at the forefront of our sort of like owner level conversations is like how we can help people navigate that, and what our role is in providing housing or subsidizing housing, and thinking about what we're paying people so that they can afford to live in proximity to the farm. So that's sort of the biggest drawback in competing, with a university for housing, and it's just an expensive place to live. So as a result, I think that's pushed some of like a lot of the trajectory of our business has been honestly like driven towards figuring out how to make this a sustainable living for the owners and for the folks that work here. And in this area, what that looks like is financial stability. Not that there's other pieces that don't go into it, but I think, there are more rural areas that have a lower, cost of living. And so you're able to like adapt a little bit differently with your business if that's your situation. But here it is really driven on needing that money to pay for to be able to live here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. There's always a flip side, right? Mm-hmm. Although as somebody who lives in a slightly more rural area, it is also a hard place to find housing for employees because there's just less of it. So I think housing is kind of an issue across the board in our country right now. But I think it's important to acknowledge the many layers of impact that has on people and our economy. If it affects, obviously, people's ability to pay their bills, but also businesses like yours' ability to recruit the right employees, and retain them. There's a lot of layers there. Okay, let's move back to vegetables. You have evolved so much over the years. What are you focusing on going into 2024 for your growing and your marketing? I know you like the seed company thing, was ready to set that aside, which actually is something that I always think is an interesting part of stories. I actually once led a panel discussion at a farming conference about quitting because I feel like we so often talk about, well, what new enterprise are you adding? And we so rarely talk about the decision-making process of deciding that a part of a farm is done. And it's equally important, right? As we pare down and find what works. But what's coming in 2024? What are you focusing on?
So I think what we've done really well over the past 4 years is dial in those crops that we're really good at. We do have a wide, we grow a lot of crops. I don't know if I have the number in my mind, but I did identify all of the different ways that we sell each crop. And we have like maybe 170 different types of products in our vegetable lineup. So that's pretty much. And then we also have a wide diversity of markets that we sell through. And so, I think we have been working in this last year to kind of consolidate a little bit in both, let's really identify those crops that we really love growing, that we can grow kind of like in a longer season, provide to our customers for a longer period of time throughout the season. And then think about, how we're kind of catering to, our longstanding customers and working towards outlets that are not quite so broad, but are like kind of larger scale in one outlet. So we've been working with a local grocery store chain called Bush's that has kind of a local food initiative. We worked with 2 of their locations last year, and we're going to be working with 6 of their locations this coming season, which means that we can actually just deliver straight to their kind of whole, their food hub instead of going to all of the different stores. Does mean we're kind of looking at disposable packaging in a new way that we never have before. But I think really kind of, dialing in, the crops that we do well, and then making sure that we're, kind of finding that balance between, being the vegetable farm for everybody, and being the vegetable farm that is, really doing well for the customers that are kind of committed to us. So I think we've in the past been that farm that, anybody could call upon and be like, oh my gosh, in 2 days I need 400 units of bunched carrots. And, often we have that. We just have a lot of kind of flexibility in our offerings, and we're like ready to do it. And as we do kind of create more systems and try to dial in like our logistics, we know that that's not always sustainable to just be able to drop in a new harvest of 400 bunches of carrots on top of what we kind of standardize throughout the week. So yeah, it's a lot of just kind of dialing in, building on what we do well. And I don't think that we're growing any like new crops this coming season. We're always kind of, it's fun to try a new thing here and there. I don't know if you can remember, it feels like we're sticking to things a little bit more and trying to be a little bit more disciplined in our crops. But yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking in some ways, we used to always throw in, you seed catalog and you dream big and get that purple bok choy that seems thing. And I think now the excitement that we get in our crop planning comes from fun interplantings. Can we get in a scallion harvest off of our celery crop? Can we kind of couple things together to like eke a little bit more out of a bed? Can we shorten up a turnover between two crops so that we've got more crops in the fields? We have this really comprehensive crop ranking worksheet we do every year where we sort of go crop by crop and look at a bunch of different aspects of it and we have different folks on the farm engage in this process. So we sort of look at like what would be fun to play with. Can we try and eke another row of carrots into a storage carrot bed? Can we grow something at a different density? We've been playing a lot the past few years with like tweaking densities of cabbages or some like smaller heading vegetables to get higher yield, across the bed with smaller individual units because we're increasing the population size. And so we kind of geek out. That's like the way that we geek out here more than, being like, let's grow artichokes this year. We've sort of tempered our enthusiasm a bit over time for crops.
I like artichokes, but I hear what you're saying too.
Yeah. And we try and leave space for some gratuitous things as well. And especially having the CSA has kept us true to, we look at profitability of crops every year, and there's always a few things like rutabagas or, I don't know, just things that we grow because we know that the CSA appreciates the diversity and not necessarily because it's going to be a profit, driving force on the farm.
And you grow flowers too.
Yeah,
we do. Yeah, I do want to give a shout out to our two partners, Jill and Michelle, who are not with us today, but both of them have been integral parts of our flower program. Michelle handles our kind of nursery production, and she heads up kind of the flower programs, which we do a really amazing You Pick Flower CSA that people absolutely love.
That sounds so magical.
Come on to the farm. They can pick their own flowers. They can come to the farm stand. They can visit the cows. It's just a really delightful experience that people love. And it's, a low cost for us. But we also work with the Michigan Flower Co-op to sell our flowers kind of wholesale. We work with, we do some types of weddings. We sell our flowers through all of our various outlets as well. But it's close to half an acre of flower production at this point.
Annual.
Yeah.
A plug I'll make also for, earlier we had talked about quitting things and the seed business. And so something that's sort of grown out of that is, I think, this year, actually right now, we're selling organic dahlia tubers on our website. And that actually grew in a way out of the closing of the seed business. And so, part of having a seed business was sort of order fulfillment and having processes to mail things out and do shipping, and which we don't really do for any of our vegetable production. And last year, I had a harebrained scheme to sell seed garlic by the clove because of some machinery that I had gotten to break apart garlic. And so we actually sold, sort of in conjunction with the seed company, we're selling seed garlic and mailing out sort of these bulkier things, and which was garlic. And then sort of by the end of the year, we had decided to close shop on the seed company, which was, its own thing. And then Michelle sort of brought up, well, we harvested so many dahlia tubers, and we sort of, because of the seed company, had this, this sort of whole system in place for order fulfillment for something like that. And we had sort of done it through the garlic. And so now, that's something that's kind of new and exciting right now, is we realized, well, shoot, like we will probably grow a fraction of what we've saved. And maybe here's an opportunity for some sort of slow season sales, through an online, catalog. And we didn't have to create any of this from scratch, even though it's a new thing for us. We sort of have all the pieces in place because of having run these businesses, as part of the farm in the past. So that's sort of a plug for, shutting things down or changing the way you do things, because you never know, how something's going to evolve over time. And we'll see. But that was pretty exciting to have sort of a brand new product and a new way that we're selling things.
Yeah, that's exciting.
I would also say that while I'm probably the least involved in the flower planning, it probably is one of the places that we're doing probably the most kind of new varieties, or like, it seems like flowers really do need to kind of stick with the trends depending on how you're selling your flowers. But I would bet that that's probably the part of our crop plan that might, have the most new aspects to it this season.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's definitely a more of a fashion world influence into the flower growing thing than vegetables. Is like, people like tomatoes, at the end of the day. But yes. Wow, we have so much to talk about. Okay, I want to make sure we talk about a few things that it seems like are really important to the ethos of your farm, around sustainability and practices. We've talked a little bit about the no-till growing and getting to know your land, and you're certified organic. You also have these beef cattle on the land too. And it sounds like they also play a role in your bigger picture for the stewardship of the land. And can you talk a little bit more about how you're balancing just that overall long-term picture of the land's health?
Yeah, definitely. So along with getting 40 tillable acres. And then my parents also bought 40 acres adjacent to our farm, thinking they were going to move there and, build a house. And it's also farmland, but they ended up buying a very lovely house around the corner that already existed. So we're farming that land also. So the cattle, Jill and I had always had from the very beginning, we're animal people. Jill grew up with horses. And so we've dabbled a lot, mostly because of Ben's influence, I think, in the very beginning at Tillian. Had a lot of animals on the farm, had a lot of passionate dreams of what that could look like. And over time, the animals got larger and fewer. And we've sort of settled on cattle because they are these really amazing creatures that are, when managed well, they can really help, maintain and rejuvenate the vitality of a piece of land. And so we rotationally graze a small beef herd of, I think there's about 15 animals right now. And we have breeding stock. So we have sort of all ages of cattle on the farm, and they're here year round. And and they're sort of they're utilizing the land that's not in high value vegetable production, and it saves us on sort of mowing, and it's in all in perennial pasture, which kind of keeps cover on the field. We don't need to, work on cover cropping our land that's not in vegetable production. The cattle are eating it. They're sort of a placeholder. There are a few fields that potentially could be developed into more vegetable production that the cattle are grazing. They're sort of only increasing the fertility and the organic matter and vitality of that soil. And they're also just sort of this really charismatic animal that people love looking at and interacting with, and then we sort of produce our own hay on the farm. So, and then we're also basically selling. The beef herd is small enough that we're selling only whole animals or portions of animals to consumers. So basically the cattle are born, raised, and killed on the farm. It's a kind of a closed loop system. They're sort of spending their whole lives here and cycling nutrients around. And those parts of the farm are really beautiful. It's basically surrounding all of our vegetable fields. And so they're constantly moving. They're these great recycling, like the crew's favorite thing is when we get to rip out a bed of something that maybe didn't all get sold, or we have to like cut down the stalks of something to make room for the next crop. And so we do a lot of because they're always going to be in proximity, our vegetable fields, to the cattle, we'll spend an extra 5 minutes to rip out 300 heads of lettuce and just throw it over the fence to the cattle. And they're just sort of these hilarious compost agents. And it's just sort of this lovely thing. And also a really great way for people to sort of be able to have a relationship. We often have a relationship. Most people don't have a relationship with their food. Having a farm that people can visit helps create that relationship. But I'd say that, having livestock is sort of, very few people have access to having a relationship with meat. And so having that as part of the farm and trying to be transparent about, where our calories are coming from has been a really also good educational and sort of opportunity to engage. While there's a lot of people that, are really gung-ho foodies on the vegetable front in Ann Arbor, there's also a lot of people that are really hard to engage around vegetables because they don't eat them. But people tend to be people that really appreciate, meat and a steak. And so that's a good conversation starter also with sort of a different demographic that may be drawn in by sort of our vegetable production.
Well, I would think between vegetables, flowers, and beef, you probably can attract anybody to a conversation about local food from one of those, or local farming. Seems like everybody likes one of those. Looking to the future, we've touched a little bit on this, like with the conversation about housing, but what kind of long-term challenges, if any, are you seeing for Green Things Collective? And what kinds of conversation steps are you taking to meet those?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this. We've certainly kind of talked a lot about, the sustainability of our farm, from an economic standpoint. And I think that, a challenge that's always going to be there is just, the value of food and how that translates to what we can pay ourselves, what we can pay our employees, what we can produce that, makes sense. And, I think that's something that's kind of always on our mind is, what we're producing, and do we need to be thinking about, other value added enterprises? What do those look like? Climate change continues to be a thing. We get these big wind events in the beginning of the spring. We've had we've had hoop houses, just blow over, kind of consistently. And, you're just constantly having to think a little bit more about these risks and, whether something is a good investment, if it's going to if there's just things out there that we can't really account for. There's all sorts of things. I don't know. What do you think, Nate?
Yeah, I think right now, as we're growing to be, we're closing in on sort of like a $1 million gross of vegetables a year here. And when so we built a barn, I think in 2014, when Jill and I we owned a house in town, we sold our house, we built a barn, and didn't solve any of our problems, but we had a barn on the farm. And then we didn't have a house, but anyway, we built this barn before we knew what kind of operation, we were going to have. And because we're in sort of this conservation easement and have a restricted area, we can build infrastructure. And just because of the way our farm is sort of developed over the years from the ground up, we have sort of like this legacy infrastructure challenge, which is that we're working out of the same infrastructure that we built, almost 10 years ago for a very different operation. And so I think, that's something kind of fresh on our minds right now is even like the farm stand that we'd like to turn into a larger farm store. And we basically would have to, one of the options is the location is in the same spot. So can we afford a season where we would be demolishing our current farm stand to build a new farm store? And sort of like the barn where it is now, if we'd like to build a bigger, better laid out, we're pushing a lot of food through a fairly small packed in place. This is our office that we're in right now, is sort of like grown out of the shop space, and
we keep tomatoes in here.
We keep tomatoes
it's kind
in
of also
here.
our dry storage.
So yeah, we're like constantly playing that game, and as I'm sure everyone is.
So is that because of the land use restrictions, you can't just build another barn right now or another outbuilding?
We're limited in where we can do it.
Okay, in where?
Yeah,
because it'd be in that 5 acre.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And at this point, it's basically that space has, all of our heated greenhouse space and our farm stand and parking and the barn and our house and another barn and, cooler space. And so it's actually, and then that mixed with just sort of the challenges of developing, we need semi access. There's a lot of space that kind of is used up in that 5 acres, and that's become sort of a bit of a challenge, honestly, and one of the sort of downsides to going into these conservation easements, I guess, is you have to be really thoughtful about how you're going to develop the space that you have, and it's seemingly forever, these agreements, so they're hard to renegotiate once they're in place. So that's been a big challenge, especially as we've changed scale, and that's also helped us think a lot about what scale we actually want to be at, and whether we'll just, are we on this forever growth trajectory, or what are sort of the limitations that will help us stabilize, and we spend a lot of time thinking about that.
I feel like the infrastructure question is one of those big ones for every farm. It does seem like there's always a limitation, whether it's the 5 acre limit imposed by the land use agreement, or in our case, we only have maybe less than half an acre that isn't in what's called the floodway. We live on a river island, so we have a very small footprint where we can put things like driveways and pole barns and any kind of greenhouse we don't want to see go underwater. So yeah, you have to, it's a puzzle. On the best days, it feels like a fun puzzle. And then there's all the other days.
Yeah, I mean, limitation is good. It helps you sometimes it helps you make decisions. And I think, like Nate said, they started with this barn not knowing what would come out of the operation. And I mean, I would like to think that our systems, in this kind of multi-purpose infrastructure are as top notch. They can always do better, but we have really we've really thought really hard about what we can do in the space that we have now, and we're always thinking about new ways to become efficient. I've just recently listened to the two-part wash pack episode, just thinking about workflow and what are these kind of specific locations that things should be at. And I think we're really in a good spot with a lot of those things, but wash pack and post harvest handling really can take up so much of your labor. And if there's any way that we can kind of continue to make that less of just a slog, we're working towards that.
So flipping to looking backwards as as we close, I always like to ask people, since our audience is market farmers or people who want to be farmers, I'm always curious to ask people about specific tips or tricks that we can share with each other. I know your farm is very complex and big, and there's probably so many things that have worked out really well, but I'm curious if there's any one best thing that you want to share, or each of you, that you've done for your farm, whether that's a tool you bought or a decision you made. How has it helped you?
I really think that while it's been, a struggle figuring out how to do this, I think that investing in our employees and investing in empowered managers have just been, a real big thing for us, because it did make us create those systems, and it made us kind of systematize, so many parts of our farm. And, it's certainly taken, it's kind of the second part to joining this collective is, don't do everything yourself, and then don't do everything. Don't make the owners of, the business do absolutely all of the operating. Be delegating to other people so that they can feel like they're a big part of it and invest in that. And I think that's been a big part of that for me.
Yeah, I would say I totally echo Hannah's thoughts on this. I think if I could go back and think about things 10 years ago and just sort of coach myself, I would maybe have spent more, I think we would have moved along faster if I had looked at the lowest hanging fruit to what was sort of preventing us from having a good, successful production. And like in the early days, it was water. It was water for many, many years, and drainage. And I spent a lot of time, because my passions were centered around, I was loving driving tractors around and learning how to do mechanical things and building infrastructure. And I was really drawn to a lot of sort of the things about farming that I still love about it. And I was spending a lot of my time problem solving, or just sort of learning new skills instead of problem solving deeply for what were our biggest issues on the farm. And I think that would have, and maybe that's drainage, or maybe that's sales, maybe that's technology literacy, whatever sort of, and it evolves over time, because as you sort of solve these problems, you can start focusing on different things. But I think we've gotten pretty good at sort of identifying what are the things that are holding us back, and focusing enough effort on those things to make sure that we're making progress. And I think that's something that there's you can be doing on a surface level, or you can really be doing and diving deep and being really thoughtful about. And I think we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and focusing on the things that you may not love doing, but that you really should be focusing on. I wish I had prodded myself a little harder, and also continued to give myself grace, because we're also all human. And and farming is hard, and it's all going to be okay.
And I hear that for some segment of farmers, tractors are really fun.
They are.
Yes.
They can be.
I know that that's one thing some farmers love about the job. It's never been my love, but I appreciate that. So if you get focused on that, folks out there, I think what we're saying is take a big picture look at what's going on your farm.
It's really hard sometimes.
Well, especially in the early years, because you are often in the moment-to-moment decision-making process of everything. I mean, like we were saying, part of the success of your collective is the time in your farms that you joined forces. So you had already done so much of that early work of laying the groundwork of there's so many moving parts on a farm. So yes, having grace that it might take time to get to that big picture is for sure a good perspective to have. I really appreciate everything that you've shared with me and the audience today. I'm going away with a lot of new ideas for my season, which are exciting. I'm curious if there's anything else you would like to share, any piece of the puzzle that you want to make sure people know about Green Things Farm Collective.
Yeah, just randomly, we've tried to be really transparent. I think one thing that has been a struggle for us, and I mean, it's why I really appreciate podcasts and conferences, is sort of this like dissemination of information. And I think we all, farmers tend to be really independent, do-it-yourselfer kind of people. And at the same time, sharing resources has been such, we have really are farming on the backs of all the folks that have come before us and have figured out the tools and piloted just there's so much out there now that there wasn't 20 years ago, 100 years ago, and there's also so much to learn from people that came before. So I think we've shared a lot of financial information and a lot of documents on our website, and I know Jill has put together a lot of resources for other farms, and just trying to be really transparent about things, trying to be transparent about financial situations and money is something I think is really important, and we've tried to do because no one likes talking about it, and it's really hard to sort of know what where you are in relation to other people, and what is healthy, and what it's good to have that reflection. So I think a lot of that stuff is available. And I encourage other people also to really try and, if it's easy, don't do it just because I said to do it. But if it's easy for you, it's really empowering, I think, as for the community to be transparent with sort of where you're at in your farm career, and interviews are really helpful, but also we all have lots of data that's really easy to share, and I think that can really help people push forward their operations when they can sort of have something to look at from someone who's either doing well or not doing well, and make sure that you're all up for collaborating and reaching out, because there's a lot of strength in that.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to say that it really is kind of a true privilege to be a first generation farmer. It's expensive, and there's not an easy roadmap to doing it. But I do think that the best way is to be reaching out to, as many people in the field as possible, and, working on other farms and visiting farms, and, just soaking all of that up. There's no one way to farm, and we're all discovering that. And there's also no one kind of metric of success. And I think that's, just something that very appreciative that I get to do this every day. And it's a real privilege.
Thank you both so much. And if people want to find those documents and or that information and connect with you further, is your website the best place to get in touch with Green Things Farm Collective? Where are you guys on the web?
Yeah, so you can go to greenthingsfarm.com, and we do have a contact form through there that you can ask any question, reach out to anybody through that. And our Instagram is Green Things Farm Collective. We're also on Facebook. But that website, greenthingsfarm.com, is a great way to get in touch with us.
And there is a resource page on there
Yep.
somewhere with links to documents and blog.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with the world. I agree with all your sentiments about how important it is to share. Thank you both so much for taking the time out of your busy farming life to share with our audience. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a really great season.
Yeah, you too, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been really great.